Welcome to the Journal of Biophilic Design podcast. Daniel Bell, who has 30 years experience in landscape design, starting in 2004. He's a pioneer of a successful eco-sustainable vertical gardens business. He's going to explain how that works. It's really easy to do, apparently, and he's just shown me before we started recording the tools needed. I'm really looking forward to watching what he's doing. So if you're listening to this on Spotify or Amazon, I suggest you go to YouTube or the journal of biophilicdesign.com so you can look at the video. He's worked in challenging climates from London to Iran, America and Australia. And yeah, Daniel, many thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, pleasure.
Great. And what if you'd like to start by telling us a little bit about yourself, what you do and maybe what got you into plants as well?
Okay, right. Well, I've been, I think, fortunate enough to have grown up on a nursery from birth, one could say. So I've always been surrounded by plants. I started working for my father, or with my father, from the age of around 10. That's when I started propagating plants. I've always known that that was something for me, working with plants one way or another. When I was 18, I started my own business that was designing and maintaining and building gardens in the Buckinghamshire area, Buckinghamshire and Berkshire. That carried on until I got to around 30, and then we moved to Sweden with my now wife. We moved there, and as soon as I moved there, that's when I was contacted by a friend who saw a TV program on Patrick Blanc, who is, you say, the inventor of the vertical garden. And my friend suggested that I should get in contact with him, as he had a building that he would like to cover in plants. So that's where I ended up, or started off with vertical gardening, by meeting Patrick Blanc in Paris a couple of times. Really interesting chap. And my friend Billy, who had a pub in King's Cross, came along with me, and we decided to embrace Patrick's approach and cover the pub in King's Cross on the quite, I'd say, a little bit grotty part of the Caledonian Road. Cover the 260 square meters of the pub in plants, and that's where it all started. And then since then, I've been working with my vertical gardens, but also still with other landscapes, such as the public realm. Renovated a quite large castle garden in the Stockholm district. And so I balance it out with both. But vertical gardens I work mainly with, but I still work on, say, normal gardens as well.
Fantastic. And can you describe for our listeners what your installations look like?
Okay, my installations, I like to think a slightly more natural approach. I like to have as much diversity of plant life as possible. I would like to avoid as flat as possible. Some clients try and rein me in a little bit and try and have one or two species, but I really don't think that is what vertical gardening is about. If that's the case, then we should put vines up. Virginia creeper, for example. So that's not what I do. So I like to create as much diversity as possible. I still experiment with plants. I think that's always important. Like with all gardening, you never stop learning. So I keep on trying different varieties. So yeah, a natural approach, no straight lines. That's quite important for me. Whenever in my planting team are planting, I try and give them a little bit of creativity, a little bit of, let's say, a free rein, but it's always no straight lines. That's really important.
Fantastic. I mean, sustainability as well is really important to you, isn't it? I mean, can you tell us about the recycled materials that you use and why it's
well, it's the most low-tech system. There's quite little manufacturing involved. If I can hold up what we need to do. There we are. Okay, so I've got a rigid backing board here, which is this is plastic. We can use recycled plastic. We can also use a cement board as well, which is good for outdoors and extremely durable. And to that, we staple on this rolls of recycled clothing, and it's two layers thick. Would have an irrigation pipe in the top, dripping, of course, and that is it. And then the tools we need a sharp standing knife to cut a slit, in and create a little pocket for our plant.
Okay.
And then we need a staple gun.
Yeah.
Where we would staple the plant up snugly. And that is it. And it might seem, many architects do question it and think, well, it's just too simple. They want more manufacturing, more. But and I say I take my inspiration from Patrick Blanc and within my studies, and I have found out without shadow of a doubt that this system is the most sustainable.
Yeah.
It provides me the chance to grow as wide a range of plants as I possibly could. We don't have compost in it. We don't want compost. I think many people in horticulture will understand that compost is a short-lived product. It's something good for a nursery, for growing a plant very quickly, but it wants to get out of that compost into either the ground or away from it as soon as possible. So what we do, we take a plant like this here, this fern. I would, hey, this is the root clump here.
Yeah.
I want to. It's okay to do this now.
Yeah, go for it.
Made a mess on the floor, but so I reduced the root as much as possible.
Oh, I see. So, because it was in a pot before, so you've taken the plant out of the pot.
I mean, take away as much of that compost as possible. It's really important.
Right.
If you don't, I mean, I've tried being, we say, lazy and think, oh, well, let's just put the plants in without doing that, because it takes a few minutes to do that.
Yeah.
But I found when we've done that, the compost eventually goes quite really unpleasant, sort of crumbly, grainy texture. And when it's wet, you can see it creates an anaerobic condition, and the plants don't like it.
Okay.
We want these roots to get into this felt as quickly as possible.
So they'll grow. They actually basically grow into the felt, so they become one. They they create a union with the felt, with that recycled material.
Yeah. So
amazing.
Let's see if we can.
Okay. Oh, look, it's a little. Oh, you're putting a little pocket. Oh, it's all snug. Oh, it's like you're wrapping it up. It's so lovely.
Yeah. So I think I have to put this down and staple it.
Yeah.
But
that's so cool. So basically, you're stapling around the bum of the plant, as it were, to kind of like make it to sit snug.
It's important that it's nicely snug in there.
Yeah.
So the root is well in connection with the recycled clothing, but the root system, obviously underneath here, will spread wherever it wants to go, and it's not being restrained into this pocket. I mean, I've seen sometimes we see these sort of plastic cassette boxes where they plant in the individual pockets with compost, and I just find that people just replacing on a regular basis. So it's so low tech, so simple, but so if you look around the world now, I mean, that's obviously Patrick Blanc started. Some of his installations are 30 years old, still going, providing they're maintained, of course, like any garden. That's quite critical. My oldest one now must be 13 years old, and again, still going strong. Some of the plants that I've used, I mean, there's a plant, Heptacodium. Now that's probably the biggest one that I've used, and that's got to over 3 meters. And because the roots can spread throughout the system, then it creates a perfectly good anchor. So the weight is spread. So that tells you a little bit about how it works. It's very simple and it's fun.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you actually. Yeah, so what kind of plants do you use? I mean, you mentioned sort of, the variety of, sort of colours and textures, and I mean, and you said just described this sort of, huge plant that you've, that's still there, sort of thing. So, can you explain? So, I mean, you mentioned as well before dwarf trees. I mean, that's so cool. I mean, I'm sort of doing that on a wall.
Yeah, so I mean, there's an old saying of like right plant, right place, and of course that's always something that one should be thinking about, of course. So when I moved to Sweden and I started trialing vertical gardens there, starting on my home. Now that's an extremely challenging environment. Sweden in the summer, is probably warmer than the height of summer is often warmer than an English summer. And then the winter, well, the years when I was trialing down to about -22.
Wow.
So that's extremely, so the difference between say -7 and -22 is huge. It's not just frozen, it's a really, and that really, it really divides what you can use and what you can't. And that was really interesting. And then I was searching along the west coast of Sweden, seeing what's growing out of rocks. And then I soon discovered that there's quite an obvious group of plants, such as certain junipers, pines, and then dwarf birch, Betulinana. You could also use Betulinana, which absolutely could be fine, but I thought Betulinana was a bit more suited. And that was also extremely interesting. Yeah, and I managed to get that working. Extremely challenging. I lost loads and loads of plants. My wife thought I was completely bonkers, bringing in loads of plants and covering the house with them, and then you had to keep replacing. But eventually I got there and found a group of plants. I mean, things like Hydrangea paniculata, Stephanandra, some Philadelphus, things like that will grow happily and they'll tolerate the root freeze. That was really a real challenge for me. And so by embracing the Scandinavian climate, then that's given me good opportunity to work in Iran and Azerbaijan, which is again extremely challenging climates, and that's really exciting. And now we live in Hove now, and perhaps doing a little bit more active in London. Then that feels quite tropical, and dare I say it, easy. Well, I shouldn't say it, but yeah, certainly there's a lot of wide range of plants that you can use.
Yeah. I mean, obviously you mentioned Azerbaijan and that. I mean, what's the sort of I mean, the climate change there. I mean, the climate sort of variety. I mean, what's
yeah.
bizarre?
Well, on that one, I went out twice. It was an interesting project. It was Trump Towers in Baku. We must have been maybe around 100 meters up in the air, looking over the Caspian Sea. And there, my main challenge is Baku's extremely dirty. Without disrespect, quite a dirty city in terms of the black dust from construction and what have you that's blowing around. But I found plants such as Lonicera pileata, Luzulas did quite well up there, and let me think what else we were using up there. Again, some Stephanandras. Might not sound very exciting or exotic, but it's very important that it's the right plant that will tolerate these really challenging conditions. And it worked pretty well until someone. The owner of the building was put into prison for some political problems. So Trump Tower Baku, I think, is shut down now.
We won't go and overlook them. I was just going to say though, so some of the plants that you used there, where it was like lots of sort of grit and dirt and stuff that was coming off construction and things. I should imagine that's quite useful then when you're in London, for instance, or you're on areas where
yes,
or on motorway sort of facades and stuff as well, where buildings, because I speak to some kind of urban planners and they're saying, well, yeah, but it depends, we can't plant that because we can't put things there because it's like there's too much pollution and it will destroy. So actually there are planted solutions that you can create a sort of biophilic city if you wanted to.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the most sort of, we said, polluted areas where I've worked is right on Piccadilly, where the particulate matter predominantly coming from buses and tyres, that's an awful problem there. But Piccadilly is really extremely trafficated, as you well know, and a lot of pollution there. And when we work on that vertical garden, we actually have to wear masks, or we prefer to wear masks because it just doesn't feel very nice just to be breathing in that air for such a long period of time. But what I found there, plants like Fatsia, Hebe, Sambucus, junipers working well there, Heptacodion, lavenders, solanum, that does extremely well. The potato vine goes like crazy. So there's plants there that obviously need to be strong and vigorous enough to grow out of that polluted, that particulate matter. And some plants that aren't strong enough, they just get suffocated.
Yeah.
And so I found that, but I found there's a really good a good group of plants that will tolerate it.
That's amazing. And you've obviously worked, obviously, my office used to be in Piccadilly, and I know what you mean about the pollution there. I mean, you've created these vertical gardens using this system, yeah, with this.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's fantastic. That's really great. That's completely sustainable. It's helping clean the air. It's creating a beautiful space. I think it's wonderful. I think it's absolutely fantastic. And again, listeners who are interested in looking at some of your designs, I'm going to put links to your website and stuff on the web on the journalbiphilicdesign.com, and also on the spiel for the podcast series, but also some images so people can come and have a look. I mean, what's been one? Obviously, you mentioned the one in the Trump Towers one, but what's been one of the sort of more remarkable installations that you've done that you might like to share with us?
Yeah, the one I thought I'd talk about was one that I did in Camden. That would have been about 12 years ago for a couple. It was a private house. They originally, the architect thought about having a vertical garden in their lounge area. As soon as I got to the house, I could see the opportunity of going from the lounge to the outside area where they have just glass doors. And I suggested it, and they just said, yeah, just go for it. And that's often how it works. They were lovely people, completely trusted in me. And so it was about maybe about 30 square meters in total. So not huge, about 15 inside, 15 outside. But there, once the wall was established, one journalist found out about it, a lovely journalist called Annie Gatti, and wrote about it in The Guardian. And then it went from there. It's been in all sorts of publications all around the world. It's given me many opportunities from that, from people seeing it, from it being published. Yeah, still gives me pleasure when I look at it now and I see it. And it's another case of just a huge diversity of plants. A number of plants we could use on the inside and on the outside. And I'll show you one plant here, which this plant. This is Telexine, or Mind Your Own Business, is the common name of it. So that's a plant that we use on the inside and on the outside. And it's a funny plant. Many nurseries will not grow it because they can't get rid of it. It grows, it contaminates all the other pots. But it's funny. One of the most favourite plants that I use for the clients. They just love it. So we had that on the inside. It's very, very soft, and it grows kind of wherever it wants. And we use it on the outside, and that going from the inside to out to in, really good. And I think many landscape designers often talk about bringing the garden inside, and that's a classic example of it, where we did it quite literally, and yeah, it became ever so well known, and it's given me a lot of opportunities, which is I was quite took me by surprise.
Yeah, it's a beautiful. Obviously you showed me the photographs of it. It looks absolutely mind-blowingly beautiful, and I can imagine living in that space is really uplifting. And the whole outside-inside thing, where your eyes just drawn naturally to take you outside. I mean, it must be a beautiful, restful, inspiring space.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and like I said, they were fully trusting, and we've got a huge diversity of plants there. One of my favourites on there, you've probably seen some images. I do use quite a lot of fuchsia, which a lot of people sometimes roll their eyes and think, what? But no, it's a fabulous plant, especially for vertical gardens. They seem to love the moist felt that they grow in, and they're flowering from May right through to often December. It was a London garden.
Oh God.
Yeah, as long as they just need, providing there isn't a frost, they'll just keep going. Brilliant plants. Beautiful. There's such a huge variety of them. And in fact, we just completed a vertical garden in London yesterday, and there we've got about 10 different varieties of species fuchsia, which is just starting to emerge.
Yeah, absolutely lovely. I think one thing that from talking with you now, is the actual variety of plants. It's like, it's not just 1, 2, 3 species. This is like, you've got a whole beautiful diversity of textures, colors, plants that we recognize, so we've got that sort of also from a psychology point of view, things that remind us of things when we were kids and that kind of stuff that you can just naturally incorporate in spaces. And like, for instance, like you said, the fuchsia and things, I mean, they're so delicate and architectural and kind of have a sort of oriental kind of look, and then you have the sort of softer the mind your own business thing you mentioned, and the junipers, which have that really interesting smell as well that they have. So I should imagine, actually being immersed in a space that you've created is a real sense.
Thank you.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's like forever changing. That's all. That's also important. And sometimes, this is a case of the stronger surviving. Sometimes some of the plant will push the other one out, but that's all part of it. And I'm happy with that. But it's having that variety in there, so you can just sit and just look around, and it's really relaxing. I had another favourite project was our dining room in Sweden, where I covered the entire dining room, obviously apart from the windows, in plants, and that was a great place to be. Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, it's lovely, and it's good for the VOCs as well, isn't it? It's good for like getting rid of all the giving us oxygen too. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It's a huge win-win. Is there anything else? Oh no, I do want to ask you as well. What kind of sort of buildings can these be installed in? I mean, you've obviously touched on Trump Towers and being in Sweden with extremes, inside, outside, sort of bricks, all that kind of thing. I mean, it sounds like you can probably put it on more or less anything.
Yeah. Well, what we do, the structure of the vertical garden, the structure wouldn't be sitting directly on the wall. So we put like a frame on first. So this is away from the wall of a building. So there's no issue of getting moisture into it or anything like that. There's ventilation behind. So it can be used pretty much on any building, really. I'm trying to think where you could say no. It's very lightweight. It's about 25 kilos per square meter, which in engineering terms is very, very lightweight.
Yeah.
I've used it in the past on a particularly ugly facade where they had a lot of ducting and all sorts of pipe work that's really messy, and they're just trying to work out how to hide it. And this turned out to be absolutely the most cost-effective way of doing it. So I love to think that, I find I really struggle when I see buildings in London being torn down, an office block that's only 15, 20 years old because it's deemed old or why we couldn't be doing more of this, just keeping the building and adding a new life to it by putting a garden on there. And that could easily, so if you've got a building that does look dated, I mean, there are plenty of buildings that were thrown up in the 70s and 80s and probably earlier that aren't so pretty to look at. But I don't see why we couldn't, rather than just pull them down, cover them in plants. I would, drop of the hat. But, so, yeah, I like to say where you can't do it. I mean, even obviously indoors, we've done them in Heathrow Airport, where there's no light at all, no natural light. But of course, as you all know, you can add natural light. That's easily done. So you could be doing them in an underground car park, anywhere. Obviously, you have to create the right light and conditions, but that's quite easy these days.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I love the idea of that. I think if anyone's listening here who's involved in urban renovation or just in in construction, then this is a really lovely option. If you're doing a renovation of a building or thinking about tearing them down, let's make them sustainable. Let's create some beauty in a space and embrace what we've got, but add beauty, add some nature, which is all great for the sort of all types of well-being with the whole biophilic design. Is there anything else that you would like to add, Daniel?
I think we seem to have covered it quite well. I go on about the diversity, and I think I've done that, and I think that's important. That's, for me, what's the most important is how simple it is. Relatively, I say it's not cheap. The budget for it is not as bad as one might think, and it's proven itself quite well over the last 30 years that using these old recycled clothing technique really does work and lasts. I think that's a really fantastic thing that you're saying. You're using recycled materials. It's eco-friendly and it's got just benefits all around. I think it's really good. And you're saying you're not using, compost and more plastic and stuff. So that's fun. It's really great. Really good. Really a final question that I ask everybody who I clobber on this podcast. If you could brush the world with like the sort of magic brush of biophilia,
What would the world look like to you?
Well, I thought a little bit about it, and I would say simply no straight lines.
Thank you for listening to the Journal of Biophilic Design podcast.